It started subtly, as I suppose these things always do, not with a spectral scream or flying furniture, but with the mundane turning just slightly off. My house wasn't ancient, not some gothic manor perched on windswept hill. It was a perfectly ordinary two-story affair in a quiet suburban neighborhood, built sometime in the late 70s, I think it was. Beige siding and a slightly overgrown lawn that I meant to tame. And lastly, a mortgage that felt a little bit heavier than a ghost. I'd lived there alone for about 3 years ever since Sarah left. The silence had been the loudest thing back then, a constant companion. Now, I longed for that simple emptiness. The first incident that I clearly remember was trivial. I came home from work one day, graphic design, mostly freelance, but I dropped my keys off on the ceramic bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. Routine, nothing crazy. Except when I went to leave for groceries an hour later, the keys weren't in the bowl anymore. Rather, they were on the floor, halfway across the living room, nested against the leg of the armchair. I frowned, picked them up. Must have missed the bowl when I threw them somehow, I thought. Fumbled the toss. It's the only thing that made sense. Weird, but explainable. My brain, eager for logic, supplied the explanation instantly. I hadn't seen them land there, but the possibility existed. I shrugged it off. A few days later, it was the thermostat. I liked it cool at night, especially upstairs where my bedroom was. I always set it to about 18 degrees Celsius before heading up. But one morning I woke up sweating. Glancing at the thermostat display on the landing, visible from my bedroom door, I saw it read around 24 degrees. Weird. Again, a plausible explanation, albeit flimsy. Maybe I bumped into it during my sleep or when I went to the bathroom? Unlikely as it was, but it made sense. It's a little bit annoying, but not frightening. Not yet, at least. The sounds began shortly after, not the usual creaks and groans of a house settling. I knew those intimately. The usual creak of floorboards underfoot, the rhythmic tick of the heating pipes, and the occasional groan of wood expanding or contracting within the house that's aging quite a bit. However, these new noises were quite different. A soft scratch from the inside of the wall of my office, sounding unnervingly like fingernails on drywall. Originally I blamed mice, though I'd never seen droppings or other signs of them. Then came the whispers. They were faint at first, right on the edge of hearing, like snatches of conversation carried on from the wind from a distant street. Originally I'd paused, straining to listen, only for them to fade away into an ambient hum of the refrigerator or a drone of traffic just outside. I'd catch them most often when the house was utterly still, mainly late at night or in the dead quiet of the early morning. Sometimes just a sibilant shush, like someone's trying to quiet an invisible companion. I told myself it was the plumbing or the wind whistling through a crack somewhere, or even auditory pareidolia, which is my brain creating patterns from random noise in the oppressive silence of the empty house. But the feeling was harder to dismiss. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the distant impression of being watched. It would wash over me suddenly, usually when my back was turned to an empty doorway or a darkened window. I'd spin around, hard hammering, only to find it empty. Things escalated one Tuesday evening. I was working late on a deadline, fueled by coffee and stress. The scratching sound started in the office wall again, louder this time though, more insistent and persistent. Scritch, scratch, pause. Scritch, scratch, pause. Louder and louder. It grated on my nerves. "All right, this is it," I muttered, pushing back my chair. "It's time to call the pest control tomorrow." As I stood up, the heavy antique paperweight on my desk, a solid brass sphere I'd inherited from my grandfather, slid smoothly across the polished wood surface and dropped onto a carpeted floor with a dull thud. I froze. My blood ran cold. There was no slant to the desk, no vibration strong enough to move it. I hadn't touched it, obviously, I'd remember that. It had moved with a deliberate, unnatural smoothness. I stared at it lying on the floor, my breath caught in my throat. The scratching in the wall then stopped. The silence that followed was thick, expectant. Couldn't explain this one, I think. Panic began to claw its way out my throat. This wasn't mice, this wasn't the wind, this wasn't my imagination. I backed slowly out of my office, my eyes fixed on the brass sphere, half expecting it to roll after me. I didn't turn my back until I was at the hallway. Then I slammed the office door shut, the click of the latch echoing unnaturally loud. My hands were shaking. I spent the rest of the night downstairs on the couch, lights blazing, clutching a heavy kitchen knife I felt foolishly inadequate holding. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every sigh of the house sent jolts of adrenaline through me. The whispers seemed louder down here, swirling just beyond the reach of the light spilling from the living room lamp. I thought I heard my name, Alex, but I clamped my hands over my ears, refusing to acknowledge it. The next morning, exhaustion warred with terror. Sunlight streamed through the window, making the house seem normal, almost cheerful. The fear felt distant, like a bad dream, but the office door was still closed. The paperweight still presumably on the floor inside. I forced myself to open the door. Everything looked normal. The paperweight lay on the carpet, as expected. I picked it up, its brass cool and solid in my trembling hand, and I placed it back on my desk. I tried to rationalize what had happened. A freak vibration from a passing truck? Maybe static electricity? My explanations grew increasingly desperate, paper-thin defenses against the mounting certainty. I started researching the house's history online, digging through county records and old newspaper archives. I found nothing dramatic, no grisly murders, no tales of madness or suicide, just a succession of ordinary families who had lived and moved on. The Bennetts, the Garcias, the Millers, nothing sinister, except for one brief mention in a local history blog about the original owner, a recluse named Elias Thorne, who built the house in the late 70s. The entry noted he died in the house, cause listed simply as natural, but added a cryptic line saying locals at the time whispered he wasn't entirely alone in his final years. Quite a vague and unsettling discovery. The activity became bolder. Doors I knew I'd closed would be found ajar. Objects wouldn't just be moved, they'd be rearranged. And one morning I found all the kitchen knives laid out on the counter in a precise, disturbing pattern, pointing facing the doorway. Another time, every book on a specific shelf in the living room was pulled out exactly 2 inches, creating a perfect stepped alignment. It wasn't random, it felt deliberate, intelligent in fact, and even potentially malicious. The cold spots became persistent. One corner of the living room near the armchair where my keys had been landing all the time was perpetually icy, regardless of the thermostat's setting. Walking through it felt like passing through a frozen membrane. Sometimes a faint, unpleasant smell would also accompany it, something like a stagnant water or decaying flowers. I don't know. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued me, suffocating darkness, disembodied hands reaching out for me, whispering that terrifying coherent phrase like, "You're not welcome," or "Get out," and even, "Mine." I'd wake up gasping at times, drenched in sweat. The sheets tangled around me like restraints. Several times I'd wake up to a distinct pressure on my chest, as if someone was sitting on me, pinning me down. Sleep paralysis was my rational mind screaming, triggered by stress perhaps, but the feeling of malevolent presence during those episodes was overwhelming, undeniable in fact. I started avoiding certain parts of the house. The office became a place I entered only when absolutely necessary. The constant feeling of being watched there was almost unbearable. The cold corners of the living room was skirted religiously. I took to sleeping on the couch again most nights, the television murmuring for company in the background, and of course the knife back on the coffee table. I felt like a prisoner in my own house. I didn't like it at all. My work suffered. My social life, already minimal since the breakup, evaporated entirely. How could I explain this? Who the hell would even believe me? I picture telling my friend Dave, "Hey man, sorry, I've been flaking, but my house is haunted, by the way. A ghost keeps moving my keys and turning up the heat." It sounded insane. The isolation fed the fear, and the fear deepened in the isolation. It was a vicious cycle. One evening, desperate, I decided to try to reclaim my space. I bought sage online and even researched cleansing rituals. Feeling utterly foolish, I walked through the house, wafting the pungent smoke into every corner, chanting awkward, half-remembered phrases about banishing negative energy and whatever. "This is my home," I declared, my voice trembling slightly. "Whatever is in here is not welcome. Leave this place now." For a moment, there was silence, a profound, heavy stillness that felt different from the usual quiet. Hope flickered within me. Maybe it worked? Then, from upstairs came a single echoing slam. The bathroom door. I hadn't been up there, followed by another slam. The bedroom door. Slam. The office door, one after another. The upstairs door slammed shut with violent force, the sounds reverberating through the house like gunshots. My blood turned to ice water, the sage stick dropping from my nervous fingers, smoldering the rug. Whatever was here wasn't banished. In fact, I probably pissed it off even more. I backed away, stumbling towards the front door, fumbling for the deadbolt. As my fingers crossed around the cold metal knob, I heard it. Not a whisper this time, but a clear, distinct voice right behind me, cold as the grave. "Leaving so soon, Alex?" I didn't scream. Terror had stolen my breath, constricted my throat. I ripped the door open and plunged out into the cool night, not stopping until I was halfway down the block, gasping for air under the indifferent glow of the streetlight. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my ribs. I looked back at my house. The lights were off upstairs, even though I hadn't touched the switches. A shadow flickered in the window of my bedroom, a tall, impossibly thin silhouette against the faint ambient light. It was there only for a second, and then gone. I couldn't go back in, not alone, so I called Dave. I didn't tell him everything, just mumbled something about strange noises and feeling spooked out, and asking if I can crash on his couch. He agreed, concern evident in his voice. The next day, armed with Dave's skeptical but supportive presence, I went back to gather some essentials. Sunlight again made the house seem deceptively normal, but the oppressive atmosphere was still there, unfortunately, thick and cloying. The upstairs doors were all closed, as I'd heard them before. In the bathroom, the mirror was fogged despite the cool air, and written on the mirror from the condensation said 2 words: "Stay away." Dave saw it too. His skepticism vanished at that point, replaced by wide-eyed shock. "Okay," he said, his voice hushed. "Okay, Alex, let's get your stuff, maybe right now." We moved quickly, grabbing clothes, my laptop, toiletries. Every creak of the floorboard, every shift of the house made us jump. The cold spot in the living room seemed larger, colder than before. The stagnant floral scent was stronger. As we were heading out, my laptop bag catches on the doorframe. I heard it one last time, a low chuckle of some sort that seemed to emanate from the very walls around us. I don't think it was human. I never spent another night in that house. I sold it at a loss, offering vague excuses about relocating for work, praying the buyer wouldn't ask too many questions or experience what I had. I felt a little bit guilty, but I just couldn't live there anymore. Sometimes I wonder about them, though. Sometimes late at night in my new, sterile apartment, when the building settles or the wind rattles the windows, I feel that old familiar prickle on the back of my neck. I don't think whatever was in that house was tied to the building itself or to the land, or even the reclusive Mr. Thorne that had originally built the house. I think it was something drawn to loneliness, perhaps. Something that feeds on fear and isolation, or maybe it was just there, waiting. I sleep with the lights on now. I check the locks compulsively. I can't stand silence. There's always music playing as a result, or the TV is on, some noise to fill the space where the whispers used to be. Because the worst part isn't the memory of the slamming doors or the moving objects. It was the chilling realization that the barrier between our mundane, rational world and something else is terrifyingly thin. And sometimes you don't need to go looking for horror or crumbling castles or ancient burial grounds. Sometimes it finds its way right through your own front door, settling into the familiar corners of your life and waits patiently in the shadows of your very own home. And you might never truly escape it. The fear, at least, follows you. It becomes permanent, a resident in the hallway of your mind.